Howdy, y'all. I'm Mrs. Bear. This is going to start our journey for about the next 6 weeks. Instead of capturing kids' hearts lessons, we're going to be really focusing on some math and reading skills, math, reading, and writing skills that will help us on those tests that we take towards the end of the year. So, with that being said, today we're going to focus on a writing skill, and that's combining sentences. Combining sentences are very common on the reading and language arts test. So, we want to make sure that we have as much information and we have as much practice as we possibly can have with that particular type of question. So here's the prompt. Mrs. Gonzalez wants to combine the ideas in sentences 1 and 2. In the space provided, write a new sentence that combines these ideas in a clear and effective way. Very common question, and they're looking for you to take two parts and combine them somehow to where they're grammatically correct, but they're also keep the same meaning and they're clear and they're effective, so you're not using extra information. So we're going to practice that skill today. The sentences they give you is sentence 1, Mrs. Sanchez gave me the best picadillo recipe, and 2, she is from the valley. So I know for a fact that you learned this in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade because I've heard really funny stories about Mrs. Leaders. I've heard, we've taught it in 7th grade, I know, and then I've heard stories from 8th grade as well. And so we're going to just practice this to make sure that we really have it. So, and if you really know the skill, you could probably teach the teachers in the room how to do this, and maybe they'll learn something as well. So the way that we teach it in 7th grade is we use this guy called the comma guy. So I'm going to show him. Comma guy, pretty normal guy. Everybody really likes him. He's versatile. Not the strongest guy in the world, like not a gym bro, but he can do a lot. And he's really good at bringing things together. Okay. So we use comma guy in complex sentences. And the reason why I'm practicing complex sentences because in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they're looking for you to be able to write a complex sentence. And what makes a complex sentence is that it contains two parts, a dependent clause and an independent clause. And if you're a teacher, if you're a student, if you're thinking to yourself, what does Santa Claus have to do this? Well, a clause is just a fancy word for part of a sentence. And when something's dependent, it needs the rest of the sentence to make sense. Independent clause is going to mean that if you put that part of the sentence by itself, it's going to make sense on its own. And I'm going to give you some examples and you'll see it when we work on the sentence ourselves. The biggest clue that it's a dependent clause is if a sentence contains an awubis. An awubis, which I'm going to bring up my list right here, is words that make sure it's words that bring sentences together. Okay. So it's kind of like a fanboy, but a little bit fancier, right? So we have these types of awubis: after, although, as, when, while, until, because, before, if, since. If you can try to memorize these are going to be a huge help for you on the tests that you take. Because if you have these in the back of your brain that you can use like a menu item, then combining sentences and writing sentences are going to be super easy because you have this choice board to select from. Now, you've been given two sentences and you've got to figure out, can we take anything away to where it still remains the same message? Can we add a word to where it combines better? Like, you got to figure out in your brain what's the best way. So we're going to use the word because today, okay? And we're going to start with because I want to practice starting with a dependent clause. So if I said, because Mrs. Sanchez is from the valley, and then I said, so then I need the rest of the sentence for it to make sense. Because Mrs. Sanchez is from the valley, you're wanting to know, what does that have to do with anything? And then I'm going to put she. Since I already used Miss Sanchez, so I'm not going to use it again. I'm going to replace that with a pronoun. She gave me the best picadillo recipe. Okay, so that's my sentence. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to highlight the different parts so you can see it. So I started with an awubis. So that makes this part of the sentence a dependent clause. Because Mrs. Sanchez is from the Valley, and then it says, she gave me the best picadillo recipe. This is independent because it has a subject, and then that subject is doing something. It's giving Mrs. Bear the best picadillo recipe, right? But then we're missing something. When we start our sentence with an alubis, with a dependent clause, it needs a comma. It needs a comma once it goes to the independent, okay? And so that's where we're going to add comma guy. Sorry, I didn't mean to add that. So we're going to add comma guy here. I'm making him small so he fits. I know I'm cutting off the she, but I want you to see it. Okay. Because Mrs. Sanchez is from the Valley, she gave me the best picadillo recipe. So that would be a grammatically correct sentence. Does it combine both ideas in a clear and effective way? It's clear, it's effective, and it's writing a complex sentence. So that's what we're going to be practicing today. Okay, we did a sentence earlier where we started with a dependent clause, and we know it's a dependent clause because it starts with an alubis, and it needs more information for it to make sense. So once we ended that part of the sentence and went to an independent clause, we used comma guy, and I know comma guy is blocking up some of the letters, so I apologize for that. But now let's flip it. Now let's flip it to where Miss Sanchez gave me the best picadillo recipe because she is from, and the Valley should be capitalized. Miss Sanchez is going to get mad at me because of that. Okay? So I have this sentence now. So let's highlight, and I want to remind you of our little characters. So we've got a independent clause at the start. And you see that because you have a subject, and the subject is doing something. Miss Sanchez gave me the best picadillo recipe. And then we have a dependent clause right after. And we know that because it starts with an alubis, and it says because she is from the Valley. Okay, so we have this independent clause and we have a dependent clause. And so the rule changes. Before, we needed comma guy. Comma guy comes in when you start with a dependent clause, right? He's got to hold up independent clause for the sentence to make sense. When you start with an independent clause, you don't need comma guy. Comma guy is not invited to the party. So independent, no comma guy. Okay? If you start with a dependent clause, you need comma guy in that sentence. So we're going to be practicing that skill. So this sentence looks perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to try to get you to practice some. And we're going to see some silly examples with teachers and things like that just to try to practice the skill and get you to remember it. So here's your prompt. Mr. Davis wants to combine the ideas in sentences 4 and 5. In the space provided, you write a new sentence that combines these ideas in a clear and effective way. So very similar to the prompt that we saw earlier. Here's your two sentences that they give you. Coach Levins won a game of basketball against LeBron James. Pretty impressive, Coach Levins. 2, he is actually the greatest of all time. So I'm going to help you out in these first parts of these sentences because I want to not just completely put you out on your own. But for dependent clause, I'm going to make you use the word since. So since is an alubis. So we're going to start our sentence with an alubis. I want you as a class on a piece of paper, I want you to try to write the sentence using both of these parts and for it to be clear and effective by combining it. And then I'm going to come back and then I'm going to basically ask what y'all wrote and then I'm going to show you what I would write. And let's see if it compares. Okay, so pause the video and go ahead and try to write your sentence.